So very first we will be doing is we'll be sending a get request. Now get request, if you go over here to the Stripe API documentation. So get is like when we list all customers, this is basically the get request, and this is the base URL, right? So it will gonna give us list of all the customers, as in what all customers that we have added over here. See, we have 12 customers added, right? So if I send this request, right, we have to provide some arguments as well, but these arguments are optional. We've already seen this thing in Postman, right, how to send a get request. Now if you look over here, we can limit it by 3 users as well, as in if you go over here, there's another argument that we need to provide in the parameter, where we can provide the parameter as 3, and it will gonna give us 3 customers, right? So how to send this get request? In order to do that, first I need to do some imports, which is like the static import. So static import for Rest Assured are available over here, right? And this, at this moment, we would be needing the very first one, right? We're gonna see Rest Assured matchers and Hamcrest library as well when we're gonna do some assertions on our request, on the response that we're gonna get. But for the timing, I'm going to use this, right? Now in order to use any one of these, just copy them and paste it over here and do static import static this, and you need to add this with all these and put a semicolon, right? So as I said, we'll be starting with this one first. So I'm going to comment out this part for the timing. Now in order to send the get request, there are a couple of steps that we need to follow. Now if we talk about the Stripe API, so the very first thing that we need to do is set the authentication, right? So authentication, Stripe API accept authentication in a form of a basic auth, right? Or in a form of a bearer token that has to be provided using the headers, right? So we're gonna see both basic auth as well as how we can use the token in the headers in Rest Assured, right? So we're gonna cover this part, and then the other step is to send the request, receive the response, and then do validations, right? So these are the steps that we actually need to follow. Now in order to send the request, there are some set of request specifications that we need to follow. Like for example, in Stripe API, as I said, that we first need to provide the basic authentication, right? Where we need to provide the token in a form in this basic authentication argument, right? So if like, let me open up the Postman. So till the time it is opening, specifications are nothing. These are basically some pre-requests that we provide before we are sending the request, right? So before we send this get request, we need to authenticate, right? In case there are some parameters required in the specification, we have to provide those parameters as well, like these param, right? If you go to the Stripe API, then this is how we have listed all customer. So the specifications will gonna include the limit value in the parameter. If we are providing the bearer token in headers, we need to provide it in the headers, or we can do it using the basic auth as well. In that we need to provide the username. If password is not required, we'll be keeping it blank, right? So these are the things that we have to actually provide in the specification while sending the request. Now, how to define specification in Rest Assured? That is done with the help of a method called as given, right? So given dot, and then here the next step is to set up an authentication, because the Stripe API requires an authentication, right? So this is where you're gonna see auth. And what type of auth is this? Auth is again going to return you authentication specification. From here you will be seeing what sort of authentication it is. So these are the things that there is a proper documentation available for it, as in what we call it as a Java doc. So if you go over here and search for Rest Assured Java doc, so you're gonna get this Java documentation, the latest Java documentation from here. And on this Java documentation, you need to look for the very first class that you added, that is Rest Assured. So Rest Assured, you can go to Rest Assured class. From here you'll find it over here, Rest Assured. That is Rest Assured, right? And inside this class, the method, I mean, you can see that there's a whole big documentation available, how you can set the specification, add the parameters, right? Then assert as well. Then a lot of things are available in this documentation. It's a very good documentation, but we'll go down and we'll look at the method summary over here. So in the method, the very first method that we called is given. So if you look over here, this is the given, and what it says, start building the request part of IO Rest Assured specification. So given is the starting part where you actually going to define the specification, and in return it returns you the request specification interface, right, where you can call other methods from here. That is what type of specification that you that it may need any authentication, right? If we need an auth to be specified, so we have actually selected auth from here. So if you look over here, given.auth. Now auth is again returning you authentication specification. If you click on this, from the auth, what type of authentication you need? You need a basic authentication with username and password. You need some certificate. You need some auth 2, right? N number of authentication that we actually see over here in the Postman. These are the things that you can access using this Java API documentation. So this is the whole crux. I mean, this Java document is everything on Rest Assured. All the functionality, you're gonna find it inside this Java document. So it may gonna take some time for you to get yourself comfortable in this documentation part, but before that, let's try looking at the very basic part, how to send the very first GET request, right? So for the time being, I called given.auth, and from the auth I am going to select the basic authentication, where the parameters are username and the password. Now in the username, I'll be providing my token, right? The token that I need to access this API, the Stripe API. So this you're gonna get it inside your developers, and then you need to go to API key, and this is the token that I'll be using. So I'll copy this and paste it over here. remove all these spaces. Right, so this is the token key, and the password we have to leave it blank. Right, you remember the password, we have not defined anything in the password. This is as per the API documentation. We just need to provide the username, right? And then we can put a semicolon, right? So there are other additional things we can do. We can set parameters as well, right? That we're gonna look at it very soon, right? Or at times the request accept something like content type, right? If you remember in Postman, we have seen content type that we can provide it. Either we go to the body and we select raw, and then here we select the content type as JSON, application JSON, right? Or we can go to headers and we can define the content type over here as well, right? We can give the key as content type and we can provide the value. Similarly, in case of Rest Assured, the content type can be provided. Content type can be provided in two ways. One is setting it up using the content type method. The second way is adding the content type in the headers, right? But at the moment, the API that we are hitting, that is the Stripe API, it does not like ask for any content type to be added in the headers, right? So content type can be added. I mean, at times we are sending some JSON request in the body as well. There as well we can define the content type, but at this moment we don't need it, right? So we don't need it in this API documentation, as per this API documentation. But still, I'll gonna show it to you how you can add this content type and where you can add it. So content type is also a form of specification that we need to specify before sending any request, right? So what we need to do, I'll just comment it out. So there are a couple of ways how we can set the content type. I can see initially we need to start with given, and then I can use the method that is content type, and here I can say content type dot. I'll get see all these. If you want to select it XML, then you can set the content type as XML. If you want JSON, then you can set the content type as JSON, right? This is one way of doing it. The other way is I'll do given dot content type, and I can also give it in a form of a string argument. So I can say application JSON over here. This is another way of doing it. And then I talked about that we can do it in a form of a headers as well. So headers can be done given dot header. So I can use header over here, and in this I'll gonna specify the header string, that is the header name is content type, and the value, I just need to provide one single argument, the value that is application JSON. So this is another way of doing it. And then after that we can provide the authentication with all these things. I mean, same way dot auth, and then select basic and provide the URL and the username and the password, right? So this is how you can define the content type only and only when the API actually requires it, right? The Stripe API that we are working right now, it does not require any content type to be added for sending this GET request. So we are not adding any content type over here. Now to get the response from this API, since it's a GET method type, right? In Postman, whenever we are sending a GET request, we select the method type as GET. Same way, in case of Rest Assured API, we're gonna select the method get, and in this we need to provide the URI. So URI will be this, that is the Stripe API customers, right? So you can get it from the API documentation as well, the Stripe API customer, right? You can give this as well. This will limit the results to 3, but we're gonna see how we're gonna pass it in a form of parameters as well, right? So this is what where you need to pass on the URI information in the get method. Now this get method will actually gonna send you the response. You can see over here the return type of this get method is response. So initially what all methods that we have used, given it is sending us the request specification, this is authentication specification, this is again request specification. So all these things are basically setting up the specifications. And now this get method is actually getting us the response. It is returning the response. So I can also store it over here by saying response equal to this, and I'll gonna import this response, right? And just move it to the next line over here. Right? Now, how to print this response? It's not like that you will be doing system out println over here for the response. This is now how it will be printed. You simply need to call a method that is response dot pretty print, and what this is going to print, pretty print is actually returning you the response body, right? Whatever like the return type, whether it is returning JSON, XML or HTML, it depends on the response. Here the response is in a form of a JSON. So if I save this and if I run this, if the authentication is successful and it's a valid request, you're gonna see a valid response in sometime in your console. If you look over here, then you got all the customer data over here. Let us validate this data. So there's a mail ID corporate@waytoautomation.com, and the last one over here I got is, let's see, this one, right? So over here, if I go to the customer data, so corporate@waytoautomation.com, and the last one is this. So even if you copy this and go to JSON editor online and paste it, you're gonna see the list of 10 data that is showing over here, the list of 9 data. So maybe just give it a moment. If I go over here, so it is showing us 12 results, and I think the complete data is not copied over here. Just give it a moment, because as we see, we got it from beginning itself, right? corporate@waytoautomation.com, and then the second ID that we got is info@waytoautomation.com. So over here the second one was info@waytoautomation.com, and then here should be 10th October 2018, the last date. So let's see if we have any date field over here. So created, okay, so there's in a different format, but let's see if any thing else can be matched. If I open this, the ID, customer ID. Okay, this is not the one. Right, so maybe there is some limit to 10 users when we are getting response over here, right? Even if I send this through Postman, maybe this is written in the API documentation itself. Just give me a moment. Yeah, so see, by default, the limit is 10, right? So that's the reason we are getting 10 users. So this is the correct response that we got, right? But if we want to limit it to 3, then we can use some parameters as well. So we're going to see how to use parameters as well with Postman, with Rest Assured API.